Today, we're going to tackle a massive story, over 1,000 years of Russian history. Think about that, from Vikings in longships all the way to the revolution that toppled the very last Tsar. So let's dive right in.
And just to give you a sense of the sheer scale here, look at this. We kick things off way back around 862 AD. That's when a Viking chief, Rurik, supposedly shows up and starts a dynasty. And we're going to ride this story all the way to 1917, when the very last Tsar is forced off his throne. That's over 1,000 years of history. It's a lot, I know, so we got to break it down.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll see how the very first Russian state, Kievan Rus, was born. Then, we'll dive into a really tough period, the Mongol yoke. After that, we get the rise of the Tsars, the push to build a modern empire, and then, well, a whole century of expansion and serious trouble that leads straight to the final, world-shaking revolution.
All right, first stop. And you might be surprised to learn that our story doesn't actually start in Russia. Nope, it starts in Scandinavia with Viking raiders. These guys were called Varangians, and they'd row their longships up the great rivers of Eastern Europe, about to change everything.
So these Varangians, they were part trader, part raider. And the story goes that the local Slavic tribes were so fed up with fighting each other, they basically invited a Varangian chief, Rurik, to come and rule over them. Bring some order, you know? Well, his successor moves the whole operation to Kiev, and boom, you have Kievan Rus. But the real game changer, that's when Vladimir the Great decides to convert to Orthodox Christianity. This move connects them directly to the powerful Byzantine Empire. Under his son Yaroslav the Wise, things really take off. Kievan Rus becomes a golden age state, powerful, sophisticated, a hub of trade. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? This unity just didn't last. After Yaroslav died, his sons started fighting, and the whole thing just shattered into a bunch of feuding princedoms. And that left them wide open for what was coming next from the east.
So you've got all these little princedoms all squabbling with each other. They were completely unprepared for what was about to hit them. And I mean the most terrifying military force on the planet at the time, the Mongol Empire. Their arrival was a shockwave that kicked off a whole new, brutal era of survival.
Right. So in the 1230s, a huge Mongol army, led by Genghis Khan's own grandson, just poured into the land. The destruction was unimaginable. Cities torched, populations decimated, and for the next 250 years, the Rus princes were no longer in charge. They were now vassals of the Mongol Empire, answering to a part of it called the Golden Horde.
This whole period has a name in Russian history, the Tatar yoke. And yoke is the perfect word for it. Living under the yoke meant total submission to the Khan. The princes had to make these long journeys to the Mongol capital just to pledge their loyalty. And, of course, they had to pay a ton of tribute. If they didn't pay up, the Mongols would send raiding parties to remind them who was boss. It was a really harsh time that left a deep scar on the Russian psyche.
But, you know, even in the darkest times, things can shift. A new power center started to emerge, Moscow. See, Moscow's princes were clever. Instead of fighting the Mongols all the time, they worked with them, helping collect tribute from other princes. And this let them quietly build up their own power and wealth. The first big sign of change was in 1380. Prince Dmitry Donskoy actually beat the Tatars in a major battle. As the Golden Horde started to crumble from the inside, Moscow just got stronger. And when Constantinople fell to the Turks, Moscow stepped up, calling itself the Third Rome, the new protector of the Orthodox faith. The final showdown came with Ivan III. He literally faced down a Tatar army, and they backed off. The yoke was finally definitively broken.
Okay, so the Mongols are gone. Now what? Well, the princes of Moscow start pulling all the Russian lands together under their control. And this whole new era is going to be defined by one of Ivan III's successors, a guy who's about to take on a brand new, all-powerful title, Tsar.
And here he is. In 1547, Ivan IV is crowned the first ever Tsar of all Russia. And what a complicated figure he was. On one hand, he was a brilliant state builder, expanding Russia's territory and updating the government. On the other hand, he was a deeply paranoid tyrant. His brutal purges and secret police earned him the nickname he's famous for, Ivan the Terrible. I mean, this is a guy who, in a fit of rage, actually killed his own son and heir.
So after Ivan's other son dies without an heir, that's it. The Rurik dynasty, which had ruled for 700 years, is just over. And what follows is a complete and utter nightmare for Russia. They call it the Time of Troubles. Think famine,
plague, a third of the population dies. You've got imposters popping up, claiming to be a long-lost prince. Foreign armies from Poland and Sweden see their chance and invade, even taking Moscow. The country was literally about to disappear. But then, in a last-ditch effort, the people rallied. A national militia drove the Poles out of Moscow. And to finally bring back some stability, they elected a new czar, a young guy named Mikhail Romanov. And just like that, a new dynasty begins, one that's going to last for the next 300 years.
So the first Romanovs did a good job of just holding the country together. But one of Mikhail's successors, he had much bigger plans. He looked at Russia and saw this huge, isolated, kind of backward country. And he thought, nope, we're going to be a modern European power.
And I mean, just look at the transformation under this guy, Peter the Great. It's night and day. Before Peter, Russia is this traditional landlocked place. After Peter, it's a naval power on the Baltic Sea. He builds the first ever Russian Navy from nothing. He builds an entire new capital, St. Petersburg, calling it his window to the West. He drags the army, the government, the whole country, kicking and screaming into the modern era. He totally remade Russia.
The transformation didn't stop with Peter. Later in the 18th century, you get Catherine the Great. And get this, she was a German princess who basically staged a coup to overthrow her own husband and take the throne. They called her an enlightened autocrat, which is a cool way of saying she had total power, but she was also into new ideas of reason and progress. She supported the arts, wrote letters with famous philosophers, and massively expanded the empire's borders.
So by the time we hit the 19th century, Russia is an absolute giant on the world stage, a colossus. But, and you can probably feel this coming, this giant was standing on some very shaky ground. The whole century was just one big contradiction.
I mean, look at this list. It's a total roller coaster. You get this incredible victory, defeating Napoleon's invasion in 1812. Russia's on top of the world. But then you get extreme repression, with Nicholas I crushing any hint of liberal reform. Then comes the Crimean War, and oops, Russia gets defeated, and it's a huge wake-up call. It shows just how far behind they are industrially. So the next Tsar, Alexander II, makes this monumental move. He frees the serfs in 1861. A huge step forward, right? Well, for some, it wasn't enough. And in a shocking turn, this liberator Tsar is assassinated by radicals. Just an incredible amount of tension.
So assassinating a reforming czar, what do you think happened next? Yep, more repression. The government clamps down hard. At the same time, Russia starts to industrialize like crazy. But all those political tensions are still there, just bubbling under the surface. It was a powder keg. And the spark that was about to set it all off? World War I. World War I was just an absolute disaster for the Russian Empire. Millions died at the front. Back home, the economy completely fell apart. There was no food in the cities. By February 1917, people had had enough. Workers went on strike in the capital. And this is the key moment. When the Tsar ordered his soldiers to fire on the crowds, they refused. In fact, they joined them. The government had lost all control. It was over. The Tsar's own generals went to him and said, "You have to abdicate. It's the only way." And he did. Just like that, 300 years of Romanov rule gone.
But getting rid of the Tsar didn't magically fix everything. In fact, it created a huge power vacuum. You had this new, weak provisional government trying to run things. But all over the country, you also had these powerful workers' councils called Soviets. So Russia basically had two governments at once, and neither one was really in charge. It was total chaos.
And who steps into this chaos? Vladimir Lenin and his super radical Bolshevik party. They had these simple, catchy slogans everyone could get behind: peace, land, and bread. And as they gained support, they waited for their moment. Then, in October, they struck. They stormed the Winter Palace, kicked out the provisional government, and seized power for themselves. A brand new and very radical era was beginning.
So think about that. We started with a Viking prince, and we've ended 1,000 years later with a Marxist revolutionary. The Tsar is gone. An entire world has been wiped away. And now, a completely new ideology is calling the shots. It leaves you with one massive question, doesn't it? What happens when a country that's known nothing but autocracy for 1,000 years suddenly starts over? But that is a story for another time.